All right, so we are very excited to have a special guest here for our feature video for our 2020 Student Symposium on the Environment, Dr. David Orr. So, David, for those people who don't know you very well, can you give us a little bit about your background and your connection to Westminster College?
Well, sure. Helen, first of all, nice to be with you and back at Westminster in even virtual form. My dad became president of Westminster in 1949, and I was just a little tot at the time. And so my first memories of Westminster were the parade that the college held for him down Main Street, down Market Street into Wilmington in 1949 as we came into town. Um, Lived in New Wilmington until 1966. Well, after graduate school, after graduating from Westminster in 1965, went to Michigan State and then University of Pennsylvania. So memories of the New Wilmington are very strong. And the town in 1949 until about the time I graduated was a pretty coherent small town. The theater was active, and I saw Gone with the Wind at the New Wilmington Theater. There are two grocery stores and appliance store and Isley's ice cream shop and shoe repair and watch repair and a dry goods store. It was a pretty complete economy. And I think the biggest change in the economy was when the interstate came through. I-80 came through just north of town, and interstate malls began to grow. But my recollections were of a region that was pretty active. Youngstown was a real city, crime ridden and dirty, but it was a real city and had lots of assets. And Newcastle, 8 miles south, was a same way, Messam Machine and Universal Rundle and lots of plants here. It was a full city with a full downtown, but that was a very different economy and so forth. So one of the questions I grew up with and have kept throughout my academic career was, what's the role of small colleges and universities for the communities around them in developing ideas and buying power and helping to support local economies and keep small towns alive and flourishing. So that's an idea I think even more relevant now than it might have been in the past.
You've been involved in several environmental projects in your history. You've written several books. Most recently, you're involved in a project that you call Democracy Unchained. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you view as the connection between environmental issues and politics?
Yes, and a segue perhaps, but between the conversations, when Westminster and New Wilmington have always been, in Western Pennsylvania generally, conservative Republican. And what conservative Republican meant in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s and 80s was very different than what it's become. And so some of the issues that we face are fundamentally political. The Republican Party has changed dramatically from the Eisenhower Republican years when my father twice preached before Dwight Eisenhower at his request, once at Penn State and once in Washington. But I grew up a Republican. Barry Goldwater in 1964 was, I think, one of my first political campaigns I paid much attention to was the Goldwater campaign. And we've watched American politics change very dramatically in lots of ways. And in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, when I was growing up and going to grad school, we were coming into an era of civil rights activism. And in the 1960s, it kind of exploded with the assassination of the Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King and cities burning in the Vietnam War and so forth. We began to be aware for the first time of the environmental issues. And I was at the University of Pennsylvania in a PhD program as the Vietnam War was breaking out, and then began my academic teaching career. I think the connection between all this, we've learned a lot in those years about the adequacy of our political institutions and their faults and failures. And we live under a doctrine or under a constitution that was written when the fastest thing on land was a fast horse. The range of a serious weapon was probably about 2 miles for a cannonball. It was a very different era, and the Constitution reflected, I think, the predilections at the time, not just slavery, by permitting slavery and counting slaves as 2/3 of a human for voting reasons. But it was also a time when it was also a document, I think, that predisposed us to problems in the future. The Electoral College, as we now see in this election of 2020, has been a major issue. To update that, just as I was retiring from Oberlin, my last official act here was to organize a conference on the state of American democracy. And it was looking back at how did we get to the election of 2016. The goal was not to be political in some sense, but rather more analytical. But for 3 days, we started with Jane Mayer from New Yorker and Tim Egan from New York Times, and 3 days of really headline speakers, closed with Reverend William Barber on the evening of the third day. And it was a great look at how we got there, and several conclusions came about that. None of this was new. The election of 2016, Donald Trump was an anomaly in many ways, but it wasn't new. And the roots of the election and some of our worries and some of our successes go way back on how we organized our political affairs. And then the project, second phase of the project was organizing a book called Democracy Unchained. It appeared in March of this year. I had 3 co-editors working with me. We had 39 contributors to the book. It's not quite a doorstopper, but it's a big book. And it had to be, because to study democracy and how do we rebuild it and repair it is critically important. The third phase was to be 14 events around the country with teams of authors and others. And starting that at the National Cathedral on March 25th. 2 weeks before that event, we had to shut down everything. So all the events we had scheduled, starting at the National Cathedral and then going to San Francisco for an event at the Commonwealth Club and back to Boston and down to Denver. And so we were crisscrossing the country, supposedly for the next 6 months, talking about the state of American democracy. And then we had to convert all those events to online events. And so we hired a firm that had previously worked for Vanity Fair magazine and the Aspen Institute, a local firm, Northwater Productions. We put together so far 10 online productions that have included, probably almost 100 people have been involved in them. But they're operated like this. We record off Zoom, and then the company puts this in a kind of a TV production format. But David Brooks, New York Times columnist, and Van Jones from CNN, and Jill Lepore from Harvard, and Trevor Potter from the Republican former head of the Election Commission in the U.S. A headline crowd of people reflecting on how do we repair democracy. And part of the urgency for me, Helen, this may be a segue into another question, but part of the urgency for me in repairing democracy isn't just because democracy is a good thing, which I think it is. As Churchill once said, compared to all the alternatives, it is best we can do. I think there are many other reasons, but democracy, and part of the reason I have the Agora, Greek Agora behind me, the Athens on the left side of the Parthenon and Acropolis on the left side of the screen, is that a lot of what we think about democracy started right there in that spot. The early conversations about what we the people could do. And of course, Athens, it was incomplete. Slaves were left out, women were left out, foreigners were left out. But the basic idea is that there was a capacity for self-governance residing within the public. And so the ideas are old. Behind this project, I think there's an added element of urgency in that the future is going to be very different than the past, all the way back to the beginnings of civilization. Climate change is on us. This isn't a future prediction. It is now happening. California wildfires and rising sea levels and larger storms, all the data are in. This is no longer a legitimate subject for debate. There'll always be questions around the margins, but like a picture, the pixels get more and more clear and more dense. And so as the science has progressed over the past half century, our awareness is that this is a civilizational crisis, and it's not something that we can stop here in the United States or in any country. This is a worldwide thing. And so much of the impetus for the State of American Democracy project is to reconsider, how do we build a democracy, quite literally for the first time, that is inclusive, fair, transparent, accountable. And that there are a lot of things that have to happen to make that the reality, including taking money out of politics and rethinking the organization of government. So the series of online events that we've done, 9 so far, and we've drawn fairly large audiences. The first 6 drew on average about 87,000 viewers per episode. So we're well over 500,000 so far. But the conversation has got to be a large conversation. It's got to be inclusive, and we have to begin to rethink how we conduct the public business democratically. And there are top-down aspects to that. There are things that will have to occur and can only occur in Washington, D.C. or capitals around the world. But there's lots of bottom-up activity as we begin to rethink the way we provision ourselves with food, energy, water, materials, and economic support. And that's why I started by talking about New Wilmington in 1949. There was a lot good there. It wasn't perfect by any means, but there was a lot of very strong sense of community and local farms and local prosperity, and not a lot of distributed wealth. I don't think the richest and the poorest in New Wilmington wouldn't have differed much more than by a factor of 1 or 2, 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 5. But it was a much more egalitarian society, much less inclusive in some ways, notably with women and African Americans and Latinos. But it was a society that had a lot of the rudiments we're going to have to rediscover, I think. But that's the current work. And I think behind all that, if I had to, in my political science career early on, you learn in political science that politics is a study of who gets what, when, and how. And if you broaden the conversation to include the what is air and land and water and biological diversity and stable climate and clean water and so forth, you begin to see that everything environmental really is political. And so the idea that environment is something over here as a subgroup or a special interest, no, nothing of the kind. It really is the basic interest that connects all humans on the planet, because we're all dependent on air, water, biological diversity, and stable climates. So these are fundamental political issues. So a good bit of what we've done on this is to ask questions like, if the founding fathers, and they were all men, knew then in, say, 1787, as they were writing a constitution, what we think we know now about how the earth works as a physical system, how would they then have written a constitution for a world of feedback loops and leads and lags and long time horizons and stocks and flows? How would they have written a constitution that calibrated how we do the public business with the way the earth works as a physical system? And you can take a question like that and go into the legal profession. I sometimes wonder how it is we elect people or select people for judicial appointments who don't know anything about how the earth works as a physical system. In earth system science, the law is one thing, but the question is, on what planet do you want to practice your law? And if it happens to be Earth, Earth has a biosphere, and you need to know how the law intersects with natural systems. But you could ask the same question about virtually any field. And so a good bit of I'll close my comments here by just saying, I think a good bit of the human prospect really comes back to how we educate and how well we educate. And so in the 9 books I've written, the 9th being written right now, in the 9 books I've written, or the 4 I've edited, including the Democracy Unchained, a good bit goes back to how we educate and how we develop this kind of broad sense of the world and our we-ness in it. We, the people, are we up to the challenges of self-governance? And it's always been a close call. It's always been a kind of a contentious thing. But I think at the end of the day, these things are fundamentally political. And I don't mean that in a sense that is necessarily liberal or conservative. I think we have to go beyond liberal and conservative and maybe think of our politics as backwards or forwards. And the forward view has to be much broader, more accountable, more systemic, more systems oriented. As Donella Meadows titled her last book, it was actually posthumously written, Thinking in Systems. We have to teach people how to think as if systems really matter and the interconnectedness of things. But I think my original impulse, I'm thankful for the time I spent at Westminster, because I think a lot of the impulse I got to ask questions and think broadly and talk and read came from the classes, the courses, and the people I knew as faculty and friends and colleagues around Westminster College.
Well, you've presented a good segue to my next question, which is about the students. So what advice do you have for students that are interested in studying the environment and maybe pursuing a career in environmental issues?
Well, I hesitate to give advice. It might give advice to young people that are third or quarter my age. I think this is a dangerous thing. But there are several things. One piece of advice is to read broadly. And I think one of the things that my education at Westminster did, liberal education, was to encourage me to read everything I could find. And so behind me, part of the reason I have a picture behind me instead of my office is my office looks like kind of an explosion in a book warehouse. But I learned the habits of reading early on, both in my family and then as a student at Westminster. So read everything you can find. Read broadly. Read science and architecture and history, but just read broadly. The second thing is, I think whatever a student believes their particular gift to be, whether it might be in business or leadership or education or medicine or whatever it is, environment ought to be built into that. And I think the same is true of curriculum at a college or university. Instead of having environmental studies departments, we'll be successful when we no longer need environmental studies departments, but we've infused the entire curriculum with environmental thinking. And systems thinking just becomes what you learn in history and biology and business and economics and so forth. We don't pigeonhole knowledge in the way we've done too much, I think. So I think that whatever a student's interest or whatever their particular gift is, they can make a contribution environmentally. I think back among the friends I've had over the years, Paul Winter, the great musician, has made environmental music. His music on the Grand Canyon and endangered species, and he performs in places like Cathedral St. John the Divine in New York. And the music is a venue for moving environmental causes, because it's not all going to be just rational thinking about the subjects. We're going to have to feel these things in very different ways. Ray Anderson, who I was privileged to know for the last 20 years of his life, went into business and made a great deal of money in the carpet tile business, became the dominant carpet tile manufacturing company. This company is called Interface. And Ray realized in the mid-1990s that he didn't want to leave a legacy of environmental ruin behind him. So he changed the way the company operated. And the same is true all the way through the business world. So if one of the students wants to go into business and make money, that's fine, but do it environmentally and build businesses operated by sunshine that leave no toxic residues, get toxics out of the business. In Ray's case, what he did was to look at carpet and how it was being manufactured, and he invented a process by which, when he sold carpet to a customer, it was done in lease form. So when the carpet wore out, Ray got the carpet back and could take it apart and make new carpet out of it, and then replace the carpet with. So you didn't have landfills and long supply chains. It started with oil wells at one end and landfills at the other. You closed the circuit. So beginning to rethink the way products move. If you want to go into education, there's almost no field in a college curriculum that is devoid of environmental content or environmental implications. So whatever the subject a student wants to pursue, the awareness that you're doing that on a planet with a biosphere, and you can do it in ways that enhance our understanding and our capacities to build a sustainable, resilient, beautiful civilization, or with other effects. So I think it's a challenge, and I wouldn't presume to say rush off into environmental careers, and unless they just want to go into work in the Sierra Club or work for a natural resource agency. The last thing I would say again, and to repeat myself, for students that want to go into public service, this is a natural. And we need people who go into that go run for Congress and run for local legislature, run for city council. They care deeply about the environment. These are ultimately political issues. Will they be contentious? Sure, you bet. There are a lot of vested interests that have to be persuaded otherwise. But can they go into public service in all kinds of ways, as civil servants and as elected officials? Absolutely. And we need a whole new generation of people in those offices. The Pennsylvania legislature needs some help. One of our episodes was looking at the corruption at the state level, both in Pennsylvania and in Ohio. In the case of Ohio, a $61 million bribe was given to the Ohio legislature to pass legislation favorable to First Energy, a utility here in Ohio, that helped it preserve $1.5 billion in benefits. And it's still being, the recipients of the bribe money have been investigated by the FBI and indicted and charged. But the same is true in Pennsylvania. The cracker plant going in on the Ohio River near Monaco in Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania, is also a curious case of privilege through the state legislature, and for the reason of taking frack fuels and making those into plastic pellets for sale on the worldwide market. And as if we need more plastic, the oceans aren't quite filled up enough yet. And so there are issues here about their fundamental political issues and issues of political integrity. So students that have a sense of idealism and want to go into politics, please do. Run for office, get involved, but again, read, understand things, read broadly. And the last thing I'd say, for whatever your career, it doesn't matter what the career is. Time is very short. Get a lot of things right. We have, I won't try to give an estimate. There are lots of estimates given, but at 410 to 415 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we don't have much time to take remedial action to stabilize the climate and then reduce the level of carbon dioxide and other heat trapping gases in the atmosphere. And that is that is an existential crisis. I mean, that is the ballgame. And so what we didn't know at Westminster when I was a student, beyond the threat of nuclear war, that which would destroy civilization, that there were other ways to do it. They were environmental or climate. You could do the same thing somewhat more slowly by destroying our common environment or heating the planet beyond some level. And the fact is, the climate change has emerged as, along with nuclear war, as the two major threats to our civilization. And so that's the sense of urgency that I think ought to be brought to bear on whatever career choices a student makes. But that's a choice that depends on, the choice of a career depends on what kind of life a student wants, what they think their particular gifts are, and how those intersect the world in which they live. Those are deeply personal decisions, but whatever, they all are fundamentally related to the environment we share.
Great suggestion about using your passion, but recognizing that everything that we do operates within Earth systems, and understanding how our impact is within that system is so critical. My final question is about how, for students or the public who are interested in getting involved in the Democracy Unchained project, how can people get involved with that?
Oh, thank you for asking. Our website is www.stateofamericandemocracy, one word, .org. And when you go to the website, you'll find the first 9 episodes have been posted. The 10th will go online on December 10. And along with there are blogs and other articles and so forth, and the history of the project. We have in the project, there are roughly 30 co-sponsoring organizations and foundations: the Ford Foundation, Heinz Endowments, the Park Foundation, Wallace Global Foundation, Arizona State University, Demos, the Color of Change, Black Votes Matter. There are a number of organizations involved in this. But this is an ongoing conversation. We come to the end of this third phase of the project with the final 1 or 2 of our online events. And the question is, where do we go from here? And so we're trying to appraise this. We have an advisory committee that's 15 members of people variously stretched across the country, foundation presidents and scholars and former political officials. So the question is, where do we go now? And so we're assessing the results of the election. What we do know is that this will be a long process, repairing the institutions. It isn't just a matter of winning an election or 2 here and there, as important as those are, and certainly the 2020 election, but it's a matter of beginning to rethink the structural issues of how we do the public business, and predicated on the belief that we, the people, have to rise to the occasion. This isn't going to be something that can be solved by a few strong leaders here and there, and this will have to involve all of us as Americans and citizens of countries worldwide. So it's a conversation we're hoping to take to Europe and South Asia and Asia and so forth about the possibilities of this thing called we the people. But it means it has certain responsibilities. It isn't just a matter of, liberty and so forth. It's a matter of liberty and freedom, as the founders stressed over and over again, also carry responsibilities. So it's a matter of educating citizens, not just consumers. But ask people to go to our website and contribute any way they want to. We've got a very active blog session, and appreciate ideas, and certainly from people in the academic world, about how to integrate democracy within their own curriculum. But thanks for asking that.
Sure. Any closing thoughts?
Well, let me just say it's a real privilege to see you and talk a little bit about Westminster. Brings back lots of memories, and coming close to Thanksgiving, I owe a lot to the town of New Wilmington, and to the college and the friends and faculty and trustees and administrators that I've known there over the years. It's a great college, and I'm thankful for Westminster and all it's meant in the world. So, and thank you for the opportunity to meet in this format.
Well, on behalf of all of our viewers, thank you for taking the time to spend with us and talking to us about your recent project. What you're doing is very important and critical work, and I wish you and all the people involved with this the best of luck.
Hey, Helen, thank you very much, and same to you. Happy Thanksgiving.